Welcome to the November 7th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting. It's one of our rare occasions that we do a Wednesday meeting. So welcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order and start with a roll call.
Good evening, Commission. Commissioner Ackerman. Here. Commissioner Briggs. Here. Commissioner Gibrandal. Here. Commissioner Mills. Here. Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Here.
Commissioner Woods. Here. A full house.
Excellent. Moving on to approval agenda. Before us, we have the agenda for our meeting this evening. Do I have a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Trudeau. Any changes to the agenda? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Moving on to introductions. Do we have any introductions this evening?
Nope.
Right. Moving on to minutes of previous meeting. We have no minutes for us to review this evening. And then reports from city administration, city council, planning manager, planning commission officers and committees, written communications, and petitions. We'll begin with our city council representative, Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to report in terms of council action because of yesterday's general election. The council meeting was moved to tomorrow, November 8th. It'll be held at 7 p.m. in these chambers. Yesterday was a general election. As I mentioned, Washtenaw County had some incredibly high voter turnout. Nearly 63% of voters turned out yesterday, just short of 2016's presidential election by 4 percentage points, which is pretty incredible for a midterm. Proud of the city clerk for running a fair and free election, enabling as many people to vote as possible, as efficiently as possible. One item of note on, or particular note on yesterday's ballot to this body was Ann Arbor City Proposal A, which involved the library lot, as it's become affectionately known. The Prop A amended the city charter to ensure the development of an urban park and civic center commons on that property, as well as ensure that any public land owned in the blocks bordered by Liberty, Division, 5th, and William to be held in public ownership. This body would have been heavily involved in seeing the alternative plan pursued. While we'll learn more about what the ramifications of Proposal A are in the weeks to come, I think for now, our work on that property is on pause.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard, do you have a report for us?
Yes, bear with me. First of all, a quick update on a letter that was provided. We've issued, we've notified by requirement and just by practice the adjacent jurisdictions and public utilities and other entities of upcoming intentions to conduct planning efforts. One is the capital improvements plan, which happens on an annual basis. That's not technically a master plan, but since we were sending out the letter anyhow, I thought it wouldn't hurt to include that information in the letter. We also sent out a notice of intent to plan of the transportation plan. The city is in the process of starting a transportation planning process that is intended to replace our current transportation plan, which is a component of the master plan. Just getting started with that, the Transportation Commission has been heavily involved, and notable to that effort is a strong emphasis on a Vision Zero approach, which is eliminating fatalities and improving safety for all users of the transportation system. So it'll be a long process. That's the first step from a planning perspective, but that's been shared with you in a letter this evening. Also, so along those lines, I wanted to give you a quick status update on where the capital improvement plan process stands right now. You will be presented ultimately with the proposed capital improvement plan for the fiscal years 2020 through 2025. As you'll recall, or maybe not recall from previous presentations, that plan is broken down into a series of categories around facilities, utilities and service, and transportation. Each of the sub-areas of those go through a very deliberate process, first identifying projects, then prioritizing them, and then going through a programming effort to link the prioritization of those projects with anticipated available fiscal resources. and look at coordination. For example, when a road project is done, how does that relate to utilities that might be done in that as well? The capital improvement planning teams have completed that project identification and prioritization work on all of the categories. The outstanding ones from a programming perspective are heavily involved in utilities, active transportation, and streets. That work will be happening over the coming weeks. I anticipate the draft being posted to the city's website around the end of November, no later than November 30th. We are scheduling this for a working session with you, this group, on December 11th, at your regularly scheduled December working session, and gearing up for a official public hearing and consideration of adoption at the January 2nd, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. So look forward if you have any questions on that. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to contact me. Lastly, or not last, I got a request to maybe touch on how the state-adopted Proposal 1 might impact a lot of work that this commission has done over the past year. Keep in mind that, please keep some of this with a grain of salt. This is not a legal review of the proposed legislation. It's just kind of my first cut at it. For those that aren't aware, this is the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, sort of more commonly referred to as recreational marijuana. The act both accomplishes a lot of things and does not accomplish a lot of things. It sets up authority essentially for any adult over 21 to possess and consume a limited amount of marijuana or store a larger amount under some specific provisions in a locked, secure place. Individuals can cultivate up to 12 plants, I believe. More noteworthy as it relates to, for a land use perspective, is that it sets forth a lot of steps that municipalities can or can't do. We can prohibit or limit the number of establishments that are allowed. We cannot adopt laws that are unreasonably impractical, whichever that means, that do not conflict with the act. Some of those they give examples in the proposed legislation, such as sign restrictions, time, place, and manner of operation of establishments. Municipalities cannot prohibit the transportation of marijuana through the municipality. We cannot prohibit a grower, processor, or retailer from operating within a single facility. We cannot prohibit the establishment of a recreational marijuana facility operating at a location shared with a medical marijuana facility. If we limit the number of establishments, it has to be done through a competitive process. And if the state doesn't promulgate their rules within the specified time frame, applicants can come right to the city to seek approval to create an establishment. And in that case, we have only 90 days to act, or it is considered approved. In that 90 days, if it's not approved, we have to inform the applicant why it doesn't meet a local ordinance or rule that we've established. So if rules are promulgated by the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, they will start accepting applications within about 12 months of the effective date of the act. After that time period, for 2 years, a Class A grower or a micro business can only submit applications to the state if you are a Michigan resident. A micro business, for lack of a better term, is sort of like a microbrewery for medical marijuana. Then a retailer, processor, Class B grower, Class C grower, or secure transporter can only be applied for the first 2 years by somebody holding a medical marijuana license. And then for a safety compliance facility, any applicant can apply once that window opens up. Or if the state determines that additional licenses are necessary to minimize the illegal market for marijuana, to efficiently meet demand, or to provide access in rural areas, they can accept licenses from additional providers as well within that 2-year window. And then it also will add a 10% sales tax to any marijuana that is sold through this process. So in short, there's a lot to that we're going to learn as these rules are developed. I think my initial projection is that they will be closely related with our medical marijuana facilities. In fact, I think there's a possibility that we might have relatively little work to do with our ordinance, depending on how close they are linked. But I'll certainly keep you as the commission updated as we learn more about it going forward. And then lastly, due to a lack of business, and frankly, I'll be out at a conference, I'm proposing cancellation of the working session scheduled for next week on the 13th. So barring any chorus through the course of this evening, we'll be sending out notification of that.
Thank you. Do we have Planning Commission officers and committees that'd like to report this evening? Seeing no one, I do want to acknowledge that we do have some written communication, so please take a look at that when you have a chance. Now we come to audience participation. At this time, if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission regarding an item that is not on this evening's agenda, you may do so right here at the podium. So if there's anyone that would like to address the Planning Commission, you'll have 3 minutes to address us regarding an item that is not on our agenda this evening. Anyone? Seeing no one, I will close this public hearing and move on to public hearings scheduled for next business meeting.
Public hearings scheduled for the November 20th Planning Commission meeting include an application for a site plan for an addition at Zeta Tau Alpha sorority, fraternity or sorority, I guess I don't know. A proposal to construct a small addition at the rear of the house. And then we also have a public hearing for 2001 Duvarn Road. This is a expansion of the current electrical substation located on that site. The petition is by International Transmission Company for improvements at a DTE-owned facility at that location. Then we have 2 public hearings for proposed text amendments that have received some blessing by the Ordinance Revisions Committee to move on to full Planning Commission consideration. The first is a code to establish requirements to allow mobile food vendors in defined circumstances on privately owned property in the city. Many of you might think of this as the food truck ordinance. And then a proposed amendments to Chapter 55, Article 4 Development Standards that would provide some allowances for the encroachment of covered front porches, decks, and platforms into a required front setback. And then those are the new public hearings scheduled for that meeting.
Thank you. We are now going to move on to item 9, regular business. This evening we have 3 petitions before us. The procedure for this evening will be that we will allow the petitioner 10 minutes to do a presentation, followed by a staff report, and then I will open it up for a public hearing. So our first item is 9A, which is 309 North Ashley Street, site plan for City Council approval.
Good evening. My name is Brad Moore with J. Bradley Moore and Associates Architects. I'm going to do a brief explanation about the project, and let's just get back to the beginning of the slides here. So here's the first slide. This is the existing conditions on the site. The project is located in the northwest corner of Ashley and Miller. It does not include the cornermost property. That's a single-story building that has been painted white around the outside. Our property is this L-shaped parcel. There are 2 fairly rundown houses on it and a surface parking lot. It's a little hard to manipulate the mouse with my broken wrist. This is the lower level. The site actually slopes down to the west as you go down Miller. So we're taking advantage of the slope of the site by accessing the basement parking level. It's about the ramp starts about halfway down from the first floor, so we have a very short ramp into a basement parking level. There'll be a bike room, and then the normal circulation, stairs, elevators, and mechanical spaces. This is the first floor plan. We also have a curb cut on Ashley on the north end of the site, which will allow access to another garage, open-air garage. It's open on the north and the west sides a little bit, but it's underneath the building, so it's covered from the weather. The primary entrance to the building will be also off of Ashley here, and there will be a patio at grade here for this unit here. The plans I'm going to show you tonight show a 17-unit configuration. We're also working on alternate configurations so that we can adjust the number of dwelling units in the project based on market demand. So we figure we can get to 24, possibly 25 if we use a real small unit. So we're looking anywhere from 17 to 25 dwelling units. So this is the next level above grade, large outdoor balconies or decks for every unit. Next floor up. Now we're above the third floor, so the zoning ordinance requires we step back those floors. And so you'll see some additional balconies both on the Ashley side here and on the Miller side here. So here are some 3D renderings. This is looking from the south side of Miller towards the project, so it's looking north. You can see the ramp at the low end of the site that leads half a level down to the basement. You can see outdoor balconies and patios. This is on the Ashley side, so here you can see the surface parking entrance and then the primary entrance, the pedestrian entrance adjacent to it over here. And then this is across the street on Ashley looking slightly southward. And this is standing in front of the parking structure farther south on Ashley looking north. We've kind of ghosted in that single-story existing building here, so our building wraps around it in the two directions. And I have our civil engineer here if there's any questions about stormwater utilities. We plan to store our required stormwater detention on the roof as part of our green roof system. So there'll be baffles that hold the required volumes during storm events. It'll infiltrate into the media, and then if it's a larger storm event, it will overtop the baffles and go down the drain. We hope that that'll also clean the water, filter it before it gets into the city storm sewer system. And if you have any other questions, we're here to answer.
Thank you. We'll now go on to a staff report. Ms. DeLeo.
I'll go get the, if needed, I can grab the keyboard and flip back over to the PowerPoint, but Mr. Moore's done a great presentation. Well, thank you. Not awkward at all.
It's a new process.
I know. So staff, we have reviewed the proposed site plan. I would reiterate that the site is a 14,515 square foot site. Proposed site plan is for a 39,000 square foot 5-story building. Proposed FAR is 269%. It includes some premium floor area with the by way of the residential use option. Regarding landmark trees, there are 2 landmark trees on North Ashley, one of which will be removed for the driveway. No other landmark trees are on the subject site, but there are some adjacent. One of those has its critical root zone that extends onto this site. That we have done all the calculations for the mitigation of that tree should it be impacted by the development. The tree is not being taken down, but its critical root zone will be impacted. We've done the calculations, and it will be mitigated if necessary. I have noted in the staff report that the applicant has offered to provide bike hoops and a bench in the public right-of-way and a $5,000 parks contribution. This site also, they have applied for a brownfield plan. The site is adjacent to a former gas station, and the soils underneath are contaminated with materials associated with gas stations. The site plan complies with all the applicable development review standards. The plans have also been reviewed by a variety of staff from departments such as planning, the DDA, fire marshal, forestry, and so on and so forth. And we are recommending approval of the proposed site plan. Just letting you know, if need be, I have some street view shots of the site. And as you just saw, the development team has the site plan in presentation form and some boards.
Great, thank you. At this time, I'll open up the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this petition? If you do, please step up to the podium. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Yeah, maybe like 30 seconds. I'm Dave Sylvester, I don't reside, we own property across the street at 209 Miller. I just, as much curiosity as much as anything, is just what's the timing on the project, or likely timing?
Great, thank you. I'm sure one of the commissioners will ask that question when we get to our discussion. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this petition? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 309 North Ashley Street site plan and development agreement. Do I have someone that will move? Moved by Commissioner Weatherby, seconded by Commissioner Mills. We are in discussion. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be possible to get the 3D renderings back on the screen? It's a very three-dimensional site and plan, so it's a little easier to see based on those. Thank you. I want to start with perhaps the largest question, which is around your environmental assessments. So the adjacent property was at one point in its life a gas station, is that correct?
That's correct.
And I understand that the tanks are likely still on that property, but I knew that at least at the time of the citizen engagement meeting, environmental assessments were still in the field. And then last time we spoke, which was about a zoning hearing for that property. Can you remind us of the current status of your environmental assessments and their determination?
Well, I'm not sure that the tanks are on that site. They have
Understood.
done a Phase 1, Phase 2 BEA as part of their process before the Planning Commission. I know that they've proposed a due care plan. I haven't reviewed that thoroughly to see exactly what they're proposed. And I do know that I believe their proposal for their site came in February and went before Planning Commission, and I have not heard a word since then what's happening. We've been trying to find out, but we're as in the dark as you are at this point. So I'm not sure I answered that question fully, but
What's happening in the ground soil on your property?
We have completed the analysis on our property.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, I'm sorry.
Great, thank you. Could you speak to that?
Sure. Our site is contaminated. We have done Phase 1, Phase 2 BEA, and twice gone out and done additional analysis on the site with additional soil borings. The concentration of contamination is mostly on the south portion of the site, which would be directly behind the old gas station. We have found contaminants down to 15 feet. And so as part of the BEA, or excuse me, as part of the brownfield process, which we've met with city and the county, we are proposing to basically dig down and clean up our entire site. Our footprint of our building does not quite cover the entire site. In fact, on the Miller frontage, we're set back 15 feet, but we have offered to go all the way out to the street and go down as far as necessary. We think that could be 18 feet, so that essentially the entire site we would be digging down and cleaning up. To do that, we're proposing basically on the entire boundary of the property, doing an auger cast pile system, which means we would basically be drilling and filling concrete. Obviously, we can't be at the sidewalk or a neighbor's property and go straight down 18 feet without some sort of soil retention system. We'd have cave-in. So we've had, working with a geotech company and starting preliminary engineering on how we would do that as far as excavating. But that is the current plan, is to dig down and remediate and remove all of the contaminated soil on our site.
Understood. So you've detected down to 15 feet, but could be as deep as 18 feet? The contamination?
That's correct.
Okay. And do we have any sense of how, I mean, is it to your property lines to the north and west? Does the contamination extend all the way to those property lines? So is this a regional
I wish I had
issue?
my environmental consultant here to answer
Yeah.
some of these questions. And again, that's why I believe the tanks have been removed, and this is contamination that has happened. It's not something that we believe is continually ongoing in a major way today. But the contamination that leaked on our property appears to be contaminated directly to the west of that gas station building. The soil borings that we've done, we've taken soil borings, we took 3 in the street right away. They were fine. There was no contamination there. We took several to the north side of our site, and those were also good. So the main contamination is basically directly behind that gas station building, directly to the west, was where that sort of plume, I guess is what you would call it, is. And so that's what we know so far.
Okay.
The natural gradient is from Ashley down to First to where the historic Allen Creek was, and so that's the path for surface flow and subsurface flow is due west.
Okay. And I understand you're not the cause of the contamination, nor can you clean up other property owners' properties. This is the best opportunity we have to better understand, a public health concern. So I appreciate the information.
Could I, Commissioner Ackerman, could I jump in on, so since you referenced the other petition, I wanted to, if I could maybe just add a couple more points to that.
That'd be helpful.
As you'll recall from the other petition, we'd received conflicting testimony in the consideration of that petition as to whether or not the site was appropriate for use or inappropriate for use. You had directed us to do what we could to get some sort of determination in that regards from the Department of Environmental Quality, who is the state arbiter of such decisions. As the petitioner indicated, we have not received that documentation, but it is anticipated that property owner is going to have to follow the due care requirements. That is the state mandated requirements that they do not operate that property in such a way that would exacerbate the contamination or cause any threat to public health. I think that the primary impact to that site is going to be the primary result of that is likely going to be some removal of source material and some mechanical system to ensure that there's no vapor intrusion into that building as part of any residual contamination for that site. I think the petitioner did a great job in summarizing, and to your point, they are excavating basically within the full dimensions of their property, the source material, where it's been indicated. Again, it's not the full extent of their property, but it is from east to west property line where that plume has indicated. In addition, I wanted to make sure it was clear that the auger cast piling wall that was referenced not only is going to provide the physical ability to do that excavation in close proximity to the right-of-way and adjacent properties, but that will remain and it will be applied with a surface to provide the same vapor intrusion protection to this building and any future occupants, similarly to any treatment that might have on the adjacent property. So it's a couple more to your point of sort of the global picture of what's happening in this area.
I appreciate that. And then could you remind us of the address of the neighbor where the source material may be?
It's 202 Miller, I believe.
202, and then this is 309. This Ashley is the one we're discussing tonight.
Correct.
Okay, so just, there are a lot of these involved, so I want
Yep.
to make sure we're discussing the right
Yep.
party. So to clarify, the Miller property will be removing source material and likely putting in place a shield to prevent further spread?
Again, nothing finalized yet, but I am anticipating that ultimately the Department of Environmental Quality is going to communicate to them that they have due care responsibilities, just like this property owner has for this property. I believe that we have not gotten that final
Sure.
confirmation. We haven't gotten their final response to that. But based on preliminary conversations we've had with them, it will involve some removal of source material. I don't know all. It generally will be a less volume than what's being proposed on this site, and the installation of a vapor mitigation system in their building to ensure that that building is safe from any remaining contamination.
Okay.
Again, all speculative. We haven't got any of that confirmed either by the petitioner or DEQ, but that is conversations that we've been part of, so I'm comfortable sharing the sort of progress along those lines.
Understood. And as the plume is moving from east to west towards the Allen Creek, what is the sequencing of our Miller property in removing their source material and the sequencing of the petitioner tonight in removing theirs?
I don't know the specific timing or if there is an impact. They will both be independently conducted, most likely. If I had to speculate, I might guess that the 202 Miller could potentially happen sooner because of just the level of approval of that petition. Stops with the Planning Commission as opposed to going on to City Council. But again, if this project moves expeditiously, it might be able to move to demolition and excavation relatively quickly as well. So I don't know for sure which would occur first, but once the excavation happens on this site, rest assured it's in their interest and by their plan to ensure that if any residual contamination exists through the use of that wall and applied surface, it's not going to further impact this property any further. I don't know what that means to the right-of-way or other directions, but I would say, and again, I'm not an environmental engineer, but they're dealing with a lot of source material on this site. I wouldn't be surprised, in fact, that there's more source material on this site now from the migration historically than on the smaller site to the east.
Okay, so more on the Ashley site than on the Miller site.
Yeah.
Understood.
Speculating.
So I appreciate the background, the history, and what the current state is. I'm curious as to how the contamination you have interplays with your stormwater management plan. So I noticed the green roof facility. Could you just talk through stormwater management and any interaction it could have with infiltration or?
I believe I
like
understand it, but Kathy can correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong. So our stormwater is being held on the roof, and then as it finds its way, whatever overflows finds its way to the roof drains, it then goes into the city's storm sewer, so it doesn't pass through the contaminated soil. It's going from the clean roof material into the city's storm sewer. So, A, we wouldn't have any contaminated soil left on our site after we do the remediation, and B, it's not routed through our soil, it's routed from the roof into the storm.
Okay. Thank you. And are you required by stormwater regulations to, so it's the 72-hour window, or are you required to go above and beyond 100% of?
We're just doing bankfull, is that right? Yeah. So we're not doing the full 100-year volume.
Okay.
I'm not sure the time we can discharge into the sewer after the rain event, is it?
So we're less than 15,000 square
Understood,
feet.
okay.
So it will all be stored on the roof. There is an overflow, and there's a structure outside of the building before the roof drains flow into the city system that has a baffle in it that controls the release rate, so that we're meeting the requirements for the bank full and not exceeding the release rates that are allowed.
Okay. Thank you. I'm curious about the curb cuts, but I think I'll defer to other colleagues for now, and I imagine someone else will bring up curb cuts as well.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
I will bring up curb cuts, but I also just want to understand a little bit more about the stormwater. So first of all, I'm really happy to see you all employing the green roof. I think that's great. It's going to function for you on so many other levels too, in terms of heat island for the city and insulation for your building. It's huge, actually, and I wish more people did this. And I know you kind of have to because you've got these contaminated sites, but I would just encourage you for the future that, like, I really love seeing this, that people are doing this because it meets a lot of our sustainability goals in other ways. So kudos to you for doing this. I know it solves your problem, but I think it also solves some of our other larger problems for which we don't really have regulations. I'm curious, is it like a 6-inch? What is the roof media? Because like the 3-inch doesn't hold a whole lot of water, the 3-inch section. Tell me what you guys are using. I'm just curious to see how you're, and I'm assuming you're doing the 1-inch, like the first flush, I presume, or bank full? Bank full.
I think there was a
That's the next
detail
level
in
up in terms of 2-year.
In the plans, there was a detail on the detail sheet that showed it. I believe we were storing 4 1/4 is the depth.
Is the depth,
Is the
okay,
depth of the media that'll be on the roof.
okay. One thing to consider is that with some of the droughts that we've had over time, as somebody who has designed some of these things, there can be portions of them that can die because of the drought that happens. And so it would be great to hear about any kind of, for all the other kind of vegetation stuff that comes to the city, you're guaranteed to, if the tree dies, you need to replace it. What kind of plan do you have in place in terms of maintaining this over time to make sure that it stays alive? Because a lot of the work that is doing in terms of cooling things and storing things and stuff like that, it's not just the soil media, it's the plants working with them too. And I'm just wondering if you all have a plan in place, because that's somebody up there, it's either a rail or somebody that's tethered in, it's a deal, So I'd just be curious to know what your plans are for the ongoing management of the green roof to make sure that it functions over time. So it's not a tree in the way that we can see whether a tree dies or not. It's going to be like, Google Earth view of, oh, look, there's a brown patch. It's not going to happen in the same way, so.
I don't know if you've been up to the green roof we did on Big George's, but we always put hose bibs on the roof level, because for the first year or two, it's a good idea to keep watering until it gets well established, as you know. And we plant the trays with a variety of different sedum species.
Sure.
Because some are going to love it up there and some are going to like it less. And the manufacturer that does the installation comes up with a management plan, which will be part of the condominium responsibility to maintain that roof
Great.
according to the manufacturer's installers' requirements.
Okay, that's great. So getting back to the curb cuts, though, I noticed that northeast corner is all paved. And I didn't hear any mention about dumpsters or anything like that, and it just seems like there's a whole lot of pavement there, and I'm just wondering what's going on with that area. I didn't see anything in terms of obvious, like that's where our exterior bike hoops are or whatever. I just would like to know what the plan is for that. I see some cedar-y kinds of things screening something, but it doesn't seem very clear. It doesn't look like it's over your main contamination area. So I'm just wondering what you have going on over there.
So you can point to the.
There's the drive-in
truck,
part,
yeah,
but then
so,
there's other areas that aren't.
During the
So this is the curb cut you're talking
Yeah.
about.
During the time we were designing this project, the solid waste people came up with a new standard in terms of how much space and clearance and turning radiuses that they need to have for their trucks. They do not want any more situations in town than they already have where a truck during its collection period is obscuring the sidewalk. So they want to be able to pull the truck completely onto the site. And then they have new dimensional guidelines requirements for the amount of area the truck has to sit on and the amount of vertical clear distance that the truck needs to tip it. So what'll happen is that the rollable 4-yard recycling and trash dumpsters, which sit in a corral, will be rolled out and staged here so that the truck can pull up, tip, then back and continue on its way, and then the maintenance person moves that. So that's why it's there. I think you'll see a big impact in a lot of the facades of new buildings in downtown because of this.
Yeah.
Either gaping maws in the front of the building or these kind of landing zones in front of the building.
Is there a way to extend some of the green? You have a couple of things there, but the movement you were describing doesn't mean that the truck has to kind of go over. I'm just wondering if there's a way to sort of extend that green, because there's not a lot, that far end has according to your elevation here, has a couple of, little windows up, but it's not like it's some big place where the public is going to be interacting with people, in the building. So, since it's kind of a blank facade over there in that corner, is there a way that you could bring the landscape, across so that we don't have to gaze into more impervious surface than is already there? Or is it part of the truck movement that you need that clear?
What are you talking about?
No, go to the other side, yes.
Over there.
Yeah. Is there any reason that can't be extended there so that it can just be a little bit more green from the street side in terms of, just a little less pavement that we all have to
I don't
look
think we'd
at?
have any objections.
I don't have an objection with that at all. We can't plant anything here. These are planters that are going to be here. Because
The
the
garage is
garage extends out underneath here.
I see. So
But
those are planters.
These are planters that we
Oh.
could extend down here if solid waste would allow us to.
I see. So because the building extends over the top of them, is that what you're saying?
The lower level garage
Oh,
Low-level garage.
extends
I
into
see. Takes up the whole footprint there. I get it.
But we
Okay.
have to remove the dirt
Forget
anyway.
it. I get it. Okay. All righty. Let's see. What are you predicting in terms of the market? Like you were saying, depending on what the market, like, are you thinking that it's going to be bigger units, smaller units? Like, what are you seeing right now? Are you leaning towards one thing or the other in terms of how this could play out?
Well, the last 3 projects that we've built in this area, we started with a pretty much even mix of smaller and larger units, and we've ended up having to combine units more often than not. So when we initially submitted this project, we did have some more a larger unit mix in the building, and then we had to move the Ashley facade back 7 feet because of the whole solid waste issue. So we've redesigned the building right now to be flexible, and we don't know, but we're ready for whatever comes our way. We have the ability to sell 900 to 2,500 square foot units, and to have a mix that is equal of small and large, or more large. Which is good, because right now I feel the market is softening a little bit. As some realtors I talk to say it's stable but flat, and interest rates are rising, and so we don't know what's going to happen when we start marketing this. So to us, being able to be flexible in the size of the units and potential price points is the biggest win we can have going forward.
Okay, that's it for now.
Thanks. Commissioner Mills.
I'll just follow up on that then. So the 17 units are the 25, like when we have the number of 17, that's the 2,500 square foot units?
So at 17, we have units ranging from 1,800 to 2,500 square feet. This building is designed such that the floor plates line up 4 units per floor, and we've already gone through the process of designing. Essentially, each of those larger units could be split into smaller units. Now, we didn't necessarily split those straight down the line. For example, on our northwest corner of the building, what I call the C units, it's a 2,300 square foot unit, and we already have it reconfigured to a 900 and a 1,400 square foot unit. So essentially, that would be, if those all split, it would be 17 to 21 units. And right now, we've worked on enough of the units, we could be 17 to 25, which would allow us to be from 900 to 2,500 square feet. So we're really, we like to pre-market as much as possible. Honestly, from this point forward, once we get through city council, the time it takes to get construction drawings done, permitting done, bidding done, which is kind of a nightmare with the construction process right now. Next summer would be our earliest start date. So we have a nice window of time to begin marketing, and we want to do that as soon as possible and see what that tells us.
Got it, thank you. One of the questions that I had on my list, I will ask about project timing. That's on my list too. But had to do with the parks contribution. And it was pointed out that the parks contribution, according to our formula, like at least what is being suggested right now, is half of what the parks contribution according to the formula is. And so that formula, though, is based on the number of units. And so I'm trying to figure out like what that is. Either way, if we get more units than that, then the parks contribution, as we calculate it, ought to be more than what is, you know, than the 10,000 that's currently in there. So I'm just curious about why right now the plan is not to provide a parks contribution equal to what our formula calls for.
Oh, okay.
The parks contribution also allows you to account for furnishings that you're providing in lieu of the actual dollar amount being contributed. So we are providing bike hoops and a bench out in the right-of-way, and so that is also factored in as part of the parks contribution. So it's those items plus the dollar amount.
Got
that
it.
come to a total value of the, whatever the calculated was for the 17 units.
Does the city set what each bench and each bike hoop is worth in that parks contribution? Because
No.
that just seems like a really expensive bench and bike hoop.
Well, it's the bench, the bike hoop, the improvements that we're making out in the right-of-way.
Which you,
My last parks contribution for North Main Park at $14,000 got us a tire swing. So, I mean, we don't set these.
Got it.
We go along with what city staff tells us to do. And the reason I stayed up here is I thought you said it was based on unit count. I'm not 100% sure. All I was going to say is if unit count does change, engineering staff is pretty diligent about that. We've, again, now this will be our fourth project where unit count has changed for the project, which has changed certain formulas as far as footing drain disconnection, cost, and other fees that are due, and that all gets wrapped up and figured out and paid for before they start issue us any C of Os.
yeah, I was going to say that I guess is a question for staff, is if the unit count changes from here to there, will that be changed accordingly? Because it sounds like this is the floor of the unit count, that it would only get more. And I'm happy to bring more residences downtown. It's just we have a formula based on what every residence ought to be contributing to the parks so that we maintain the right ratio. And so if you can tell us how that works.
We typically do not change the contribution amount. The contribution amount is usually a number, based on the proposed number of units, there's an amount that is requested, and developers typically say yes, or here's an alternative. That usually goes into the development agreement with that number. So we don't usually follow up with any changes. It's also somewhat rare for unit count. You're talking about all the projects that we do. It's somewhat rare for the unit count to flux. I think we take it as, if it does change higher or lower, we don't go back and follow up with those. That's not to say we couldn't change the amount. The development agreement could be written a little bit more flexible. Also, it is a request, and we also recognize that some developers say, this is what I propose to contribute. And we typically also say thank you for that as well.
So this caught my attention in reading the staff report, just that what is being requested, or what is the recommendation, what is the request based on this formula, and what is being offered right now is different. And the other, so especially knowing that the number of units may increase, and so that differential is going to be larger, I would encourage that the monetary contribution to be increased to make that less, or make that more balanced. Where is the park bench? I mean, I've walked by this, not as much now, but used to all the time. So which side of the right of way, is it on Miller?
It's on Miller. There's a bus stop.
Bus stop.
There.
Perfect.
And that's where it's at.
Super great placement. And that makes me think too, I really appreciate that on the Miller side that there is a ground floor unit and that there's some presence there. I think that is really great. Like that street gets used by pedestrians a lot, and having that be pedestrian scale and not just all, entry to the garage is really fantastic. So thanks for having that patio there. It'd be great if there were a front door there too, but you can't get everything you want. Where am I list? Can you talk to us about project timing? What you were planning on? If you get through us tonight, what's your ideal timing?
As soon as possible. And the reason I say that is we just learned that we get through here tonight, and then we go to City Council. We get approval there. We're at the schematic design phase. Everyone's super busy. It's taking us twice as long to bid projects than it used to. We have to get through City Council, make sure our architect and engineer are not too busy, have them complete the plans, and then bid. I want to get in the ground in the spring, but I just don't know if that would be May 1 or July 1 at this point. We actually had a meeting a month ago talking about how to fast start projects, and we've done that before, where we don't necessarily complete the construction drawings on the whole building, but we do what's called foundation only. Unfortunately, a lot of the structural design has to come top down. So there's a lot of people involved in that process. We have to essentially have the structural engineer complete all of their calculations, then get the foundation design done. At that point, we go to the city and pull a foundation only permit and go. So my goal is still to get in there in the spring. We have no reason to delay, but it'll be up to just getting all the ducks in a row, so to speak.
And from the time that you start, how long do you anticipate it taking? And then the second question is, how long will the sidewalk be closed?
Right. I don't know the answer to that question yet, because we have to get into that when we get into sort of the pre-planning or pre-construction phase, how long that will be. These buildings are typically taking about 1.5 years to build. So if we were to go on the ground in the spring, we would be starting to move people in at the end of 2020. We have 2 sidewalks there. I think our main construction access is going to be Ashley Street, and that will be the sidewalk and possibly a lane closed for most of that project, whereas Miller with a steeper slope will probably keep open as much as possible. Plus, we have the bus stop there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Leonard.
Just for reference, quick calculation, the distinction between a 19-unit development, which is what the original calculation was based on, and 24 units would be from, the 19 was 11,875. Applying 24 units would increase that requested contribution to $15,000. So that gives you a sense of the scale of difference.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Just reading through design review board comments and then the kind of reviews comments back, and then the renderings presented tonight, I'd like to get some clarification on some of how that was followed through on. One consideration was consider bolder accent colors and be careful not to overuse brown tones. And then the response letter said that it was suggested to change the light gray panel material to a wood tone. So as part of the design review comments, it said no brown tone, and it converted to wood. And then it looked like the rendering here this evening was a bit more darker in tone. So could you speak to what is proposed at this point, the material palette?
So the original presentation was a building that had the brick base, the Nichia cementitious panel siding, and then a corrugated metal above that. And so we've replaced the corrugated metal with a product called Wood Mode, which is a synthetic wood product. And it has a richer, warmer, orangey brown tone to it, like a cedar siding would have, except it doesn't have the problems that cedar has with the carpenter bees, burrowing holes, and that kind of stuff in it. So it adds the warm tone of wood, kind of in an orangey, red-brown tone. And that replaced the gray metal siding that was there.
So just to, so, and the elevations that we have and the renderings that were provided tonight are matching, and we are going to a brown top after design review board requests.
Yeah, so again, trying to get a computer to render an actual material is, on the elevations that were submitted.
Mr. Moore, if you could just speak into the.
I don't know if you know, but we moved to closed captioning. So if you could speak into the microphone for the service, it would be.
So, for example, this is the two-dimensional output of the same three-dimensional model. And you can see here that it renders in a more warm orange tone than it does on that computer rendering. So it's just a difference between the output devices and whether it's rendered in two-dimensional or three-dimensional products. So the Nichia siding is below the wood tone on the top, and then the base is the brick. We have a few places where the brick rises above the base, but the idea was to have a pedestal of masonry and then layer it as it goes up.
And the brick color?
It's medium iron spot, so it's kind of purpley orange.
Okay. Were there any other explorations done with facade tones after that design review board meeting?
We looked at both scarlet and gray and maize and blue and decided against it.
Touche. I mean, there is a concern for me with this. We've had discussions about brown buildings in town. And when we start to think of the city as a palette, and we talk about public or private nuisance, a visual nuisance of consistently brown 5-story buildings in town, depending on your opinion, could be a visual nuisance. And so I think there was a heavy request and a very direct, clear request from the design review board for tones and not brown tones. And so, yeah.
So we're trying to design the nicest building we can design here. And at the initial design review board meeting, we had basically corrugated metal is the top of their building, very similar to what I just built down on 410 North First Street. The darker material is a Nichia cement board panel. And so we took design review board to heart. However, at design review board, that was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment. They said, oh God, don't give us another brown building. And I don't really think that we're designing another brown building. In fact, what we've done is essentially try and, we've looked through a lot of new modern buildings being designed and come up with essentially the upper floors to look like a high-end wood product that has actually quite a bit of variation in color. It's not just a straight painted brown panel. I think in my personal opinion, and obviously everyone has a different personal opinion, the variations in the colors, and we've worked with a marketing department for the last 6 months on this also, between the flying buttresses we have on this building and the Nichia and the brick base and the the wood look-alike, and the only reason I call it wood look-alike, which is actually a lot more expensive than just to do actual wood for longevity purposes, I personally think it's going to be a very attractive building. Another point I want to bring is we didn't just do applied balconies on this building. We're not just designing a box and hanging balconies off the side. We have a lot of articulation in every single facade with very large patios. So once the building is built in 3D, I think it's going to look a lot different than buildings you've seen downtown. And I personally think it is going to be a very attractive building. But again, just my opinion.
I'm just saying it for the record, because we have had the Brown discussion before, and for it to recur, I don't think it's tongue-in-cheek, so those are my comments for now.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Can you describe a little bit how the east-facing facade, or the east-facing side, right now it's looking out over that one-story building, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be a one-story building in the future. So one of the, kind of recurring problems we have is you build a building and you sell the condos, and then the people who come in next are really upset that there might be a building built next door to their condos. So how are you, these buildings are quite close together. How are you, have you thought about that? It looks like there's balconies that look right.
100%.
Okay.
And when you say the east-facing facade, I'm assuming it's the facade behind the one-story gas station building in case, right? So the way, those are what I call our A units, and the way those units are designed are such that they actually front Miller. So that unit is sort of a long, narrow unit with its main balcony and living space fronting Miller. The windows that you see along that facade are bedrooms, which many people downtown are, keep blinds on anyway. The other thing we did on that particular facade, when I talk about not just hanging balconies off the side, is in that corner, we took that back into the building another 10 feet, 12 feet, and have an actual covered patio off the master right there that is, I think, 11 by 14. So similar to what many tight buildings do in bigger cities is we didn't just build to the property line, right, and go straight up. We're offset. We have the main living spaces looking out over Miller, and on that facade we've carved out a space so if someone does go up, you're not going to be right on that blank facade. You're going to be offset, and you actually would have a nice private outdoor space off of your master bedroom, even if something got built 5 stories there.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Briggs.
As a different perspective, I actually don't have the concern about the brown buildings that some do. I think this is a nice facade, and I think it's going to be a good look for the Currytown area, so I appreciate what's being done there, and I think it fits with the neighborhood. I was curious if you could just talk a little bit more about circulation around the building in terms of, is that space that's designed for the garbage trucks intended to serve double duty for like an Uber and Lyft drop-off, or kind of some of those bump outs? Where's the bike parking going to be placed? Is there bike parking internal to the building as well? Just some of those elements around circulation.
Well, I'm not sure that we designed that space for Uber, Lyft pickup, or drop-off, but it certainly would be a great spot for it, as well as any other service or delivery vans that come in. We do have a large bike room in the lower level area. So beyond that, I'm not sure how much more information I can give to you about circulation. Again, the building was designed on, Ashley is much flatter. Miller's got a steep slope there. So we knew that we had to initial working with the city staff and solid waste, designed that to be the pickup point for trash. So, I don't know, do you have anything to add on that?
It's also the circulation pattern for this level of parking here. So there will be some, some comings and goings from these parking spaces here, but it could easily serve as a Uber, Lyft,
Right.
taxi.
One of my concerns when we ended up doing this revision was that it'd be problematic in a situation where we have this now trash pickup point right next to our main entrance. And all of that pavement and conflict and so on, and being really relegated to doing planters. But we looked around at, I guess, for lack of better, urban hotels that have this sort of similar situation where people are pulling in, there's a lot of car traffic, you still have the main entrance to the building, and that's kind of what we were trying to design here, a nice facade, a nice entry for the residents there, even though there's so much hardscape.
Will the pavement look different there at all, perhaps?
Yes. What is our plan for the pavement in that area?
Right now, it's proposed to be concrete. We're a little limited because, as I said before, the garage level, the lower level is underneath there. So the section we can put on top, we're a little limited with what we can do. We did put in the detectable warning strips to kind of delineate where pedestrians should be versus where cars are at the entrance. So.
And it may end up being colored or textured differently than the sidewalk, so it's not just that brilliant white. You asked about the bike room. There's a bike room configured, a lockable bike room configured down here in the below-grade basement. It has 19 internals parking spots in it. And then there's an option for the condominium purchaser to get a single or double stack spot in front of their parking garage, their parking space in the garage as well, so there'd be ample places for bikes.
So I just want to add to what we were saying about the outdoor space. That area also has to be able to take the turning movements of a garbage truck. So putting pavers there, they move around, and so if we were to do anything, it still needs to be some sort of concrete. We can maybe color it or put a little texture to it, but you know, we're a little limited on the material that we can actually put there because of the turning movement that it's going to have to be able to stand up to.
Yeah, it seems like maybe something interesting could be done with color. And I mean, I would suggest that you might want to even advertise that as, you know, put up a couple signs that say, you know, temporary Lyft and Uber, or, you know, temporary drop-off. You know, I've been discussing this recently with Uber and Lyft drivers. They're noticing that some of the buildings are easier to drop off at than others.
Yeah, honestly, we're getting into some details. We just haven't gotten that far in the design yet. So I appreciate the comments because the goal is to not only have a safe building, but the most attractive one we can for that entry.
Thanks.
Commissioner Woods.
Just a question in a different area. Can you talk a little bit about how the building's construction will fare in terms of noise? And here I'm thinking about the fact of, you know, not being that far from railroad and trains going by, that sort of thing. Just talk a little bit about that. Is there some standard that you pretty much have to adhere to, or, because I live fairly far from here, and I can hear the trains going by at night. And there are other parts in the downtown area where people kind of talk about the trains and the whistles. And I'm thinking this being fairly close to the railroad.
So, I'm sorry, so it's not the construction noise, it's actual post-construction for living?
Yeah, post-construction, yeah.
Well, we have not had a single complaint about ambient noise from the outside, because you do hear things such as the trains or ambulances or heavy traffic. I just moved into 410 First Street, so I live across the railroad tracks, and I have 2 facades that are all windows, and I really don't hear that much. It's a brand new building, it's steel, wood frame, and I haven't had any issues like that myself at all. In fact, with the type of construction we're doing with a 2x6 wall and the insulation, I'm thinking I might take my furnace out because I haven't turned it on yet. And the coolest that it's gotten is 72 degrees in my unit, even with all the windows I have. So we don't go through a lead process, but with the quality of materials we're using, the cladding, the type of windows we're using, we seem to be hitting it right as far as the quality construction, the price points. So I can only speak actually as someone who lives across there from now, because having moved 23 times in the city of Ann Arbor and having lived in 7 old houses, when my house used to shake, on my first house at 543 First Street, and where I live now, it's solid as a rock. I don't hear the train at all.
Okay, great. And the building does look nice. I don't have a problem with the browns either. And I was going to vote for your project until you indicated that you just said thumbs down on maize and blue. That kind of did it for me.
Thank
But
you.
maybe you can do something with the color on the insides, right?
Sounds like a plan.
Right.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Thank you. Thanks to all of my colleagues for asking most of the questions I had. My only question is about parking. You're required 10 spots. You were providing 34. I'm just curious what your calculation was there in terms of hitting that number.
So that's sort of an internal business decision that we've had since day one when we started building back downtown in 2004. Going forward, that larger units, essentially our parking ratio that we've come up with that works well for us is about 1 parking space per 1,000 square feet of living space. And so at 17 units, all larger, we felt we needed to offer 34 parking spaces on this. The thing that's nice about that is if we do split units, if we ended up with splitting every single unit into smaller units, we'd be able to give 1 parking space per unit. So the ratio doesn't change. And that's just how we've gone into every single project. Parking is expensive downtown. People who live downtown, you expect to drive less. But we just feel from a marketing point, it's extremely necessary for us to be able to offer that kind of ratio.
And the other factor in this is that because of our environmental contamination, we had to take out the dirt anyway. So rather than bringing back more dirt, we used the volume.
And for the record, I don't mind the brown either.
All right, so I have just one brief question. In regards to the brown, Mr. Moore, you know my feelings about that, so I won't say more than that. Thank you for making our city brown, but please stop. With regards to the elevation, so currently what we're looking at from the exterior is how many units? Just because if you all of a sudden are going from 17 to 24, 25 units, how's the exterior going to change from what we're looking at the elevations today?
My clients love to impose criteria like this. Design it so we can change the interior but not change the exterior. So in the way we've laid out the potential for subdividing units, it only involves shifting windows, not eliminating windows. So we might have a bank of windows, say the square windows you see in there, that would shift a foot left or a foot right, but we wouldn't be wholesale eliminating windows or punching new openings.
How about balconies?
Again, the balcony, the goal is not to change the exterior volume of the building, even though we rearranged the interior. We actually did this on the gallery, which we got approved a little over a year ago. My clients there found out that the demand right now is for slightly bigger units than they had planned on, so we ended up combining units. But again, the goal was not to have to change the exterior, and we shifted windows a little bit left and right, but didn't change the material of effect of the way the building looked.
I believe every single unit currently has 2 balconies at least. And our initial plans, where we had some smaller unit splits facing Ashley, we have the large patios on the north and then all of the balconies facing Ashley, and the way the units split, one got one got the other. The current plans that we have, which is on the back side, is very similar. As I mentioned before, off the masters, we have large covered patios, and then we have the large living area patios also. Our current, what I call a C-split into a 900 and 1,400 square foot unit, it doesn't change the exterior at all. One gets one balcony and one gets the other at this point.
Right. And then I had another question in regards to, so the building at 202 Miller, let's just say down the road it is developed. Is this something that you would be putting in the master deed and bylaws to disclose to potential buyers that there could be another building built right adjacent to them?
No, because we're not building to our property line, so we would never have to close up any of our windows. Our setback is far enough that that's why we have, even on that setback east side, those large windows. Once you get beyond 5 feet on a property line, you have different building code restrictions on the amount of glazing you can have. And when you mentioned that building, I mean, it could happen on the north side, and it could happen on the west side. So again, having been building downtown and single families up to buildings this size, that question always comes up, and we're always honest. We don't know what will happen in the future and when it will happen. But we don't typically build to the building setback lines. We're typically 5, 10 to 15 feet away. So if a building is built, it will certainly potentially impact a view, but it would never we'd never have to block up a window.
Thank you. Commissioner Gibrandal?
Kind of going down that road a little bit further, let's just say as a hypothetical that the corner property, the DEQ tells them they have to dig up their whole site, and they're like, ugh, I don't want to do this. If this site were to become available, would you acquire it and change your whole thing? Or do you want that open? Like, what would be your end game if that thing, because it's a little dicey with what's going on with the DEQ and what they'd be willing to actually do, because if they can just move in and sell their stuff, then that's one thing, but if they have to do some serious remediation, they may be like, this is just too much work. What would you want that end game to be if that were to become available?
A 1 to 2 story retail building, new. We thought about that when we started designing this. If we had a nice square site, it would make underground parking easier, other things, but we're far enough down the road.
Yeah.
We start getting, let's say, 6 months down the road, we're ready to go, construction drawings are done. We take a hard look at that, and I think it would be a great spot to, in fact, we talked to the owners, we just didn't get very far. I'd be like, we'd be happy to put a green roof on your building.
Yeah, right.
That would be really nice for everybody. So, but no, and so if that comes up, especially when we're marketing to people, that would be our goal. I think it would be a great spot for a small, kind of like, I think that was on the plans for the parking structure, maybe have some small retail on there too. That would kind of be the goal for that spot right there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just curious.
So this is kind of winding back around, but as I was thinking about this, for the contamination, if the contamination does, when you find out that it goes farther west, will you also be doing the barriers, it looked like the barriers were just kind of on the east side. Will you be?
Well, the natural groundwater, or not groundwater, because we don't have groundwater on our site, sorry. The natural way that the site slopes, it's highly unlikely to impossible that it would come back uphill.
Right.
However, because again, we're building to our property boundaries, we have to put in this auger cast pile system around the entire site. So that essentially is going to ring the entire perimeter of our site.
Okay. And then you talked about construction noise. So construction noise, for those, anytime you have the word auger, it sounds a little ominous for construction. What is the construction noise, do you think? I mean, there's going to be a lot of taking materials out, but.
Well, actually, in this system, it's not where we're driving piles. We don't do that. We drill.
Okay.
So you drill and fill. So it's a lot less noisy than sitting there and listening to 195 piles being driven in the ground.
Good.
Further discussion? Commissioner Sauvé.
One last one, it's not about being brown. But it is about North Ashley in the condition that it might go to two-way. Does the trash turning radius or any of those drive approaches, because the curb cut is asymmetrical for that loading, has any of that been kind of worked out? Or are we assuming then in the future if it goes to two-way?
Yes, in fact, the DDA went into this plan assuming that that's all going to happen. So we've been working closely with the DDA at the beginning, both Miller on the streetscape improvements and Ashley, that it is going to go two-way. That
And it is a two-way in front of ours already. That changes.
It changes there.
And so that's, with that trash direction, we're
Yep.
making that as legal.
Thanks, Brad, I forgot it. We're already two-way in front of our
Right, yeah,
building.
right on the other side of the road there. That is true. Cool, thank you.
Commissioner Mills.
Just my quick follow-up, given the math that Mr. Leonard so nicely did. If it were me, just to not raise eyebrows, I would make the cash contribution of $10,625, which is for 17 units, and use the park bench and the buggy coops in the right-of-way as your buffer in case you end up with more units than that to meet the park contribution. That's just my 2 cents worth.
That's fine. I have my Amex card on me. I don't know how to do that. Again, this is a big project. That type of dollar amount is not a make or break situation. We're more than willing to do that contribution. I mean, I live downtown. My kids live downtown. I joked about North Main Park. That's because they live on North Main Park and they are involved in that tire swing. So, you know, we have no problem making that contribution. And if you can make a motion that that parks contribution changes, I'm certainly fine with that.
We can ensure that it's updated when this project progresses to City Council.
Thanks.
Further discussion? Looks like we're ready for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? It's approved. Thank you. Moving on to 9B, 3786 and 3802 Platt Road rezoning with area plan for city council approval. We will start with the petitioner. The petitioner will have 10 minutes to present their project before us. Then we'll move on to staff report and then a public hearing.
Good evening, Ed Al-Sadi, A&M Consultants. Basically, we're requesting rezoning of a property from R1C, single family, to R2A, two-family residential district. The existing site is 1.6 acres, located on Platt, north of Ellsworth, about half a mile north of Ellsworth. So, originally there were two residences, single-family residences there, and they were demolished about 2 years ago. So now both residences had their own drive approaches, separate drive approaches. What we're proposing is basically just two duplexes and one shared access in the middle. And the area that we're occupying is open area. The line of trees, I don't know if you can see it, there's a line of trees. It's behind, so we're not disturbing any trees. And there's a floodplain also on the west side of the property, and we're not disturbing that either. And we're planning to meet all the required setbacks by the zoning ordinance.
Great.
So if you have any questions, okay.
Thank you. We will now head to Ms. DeLeo for our staff report.
Thank you. As the petitioner mentioned, this is a rezoning for 2 adjacent lots totaling about 1.6 acres from R1C, single-family residential, to R2A, two-family dwelling. An area plan is required when an amendment to the zoning map is proposed. The purpose of an area plan is to demonstrate that the property can be developed consistent with the requested zoning classification. And you can see this area plan does show that two-family homes can be developed there. At one point, a site plan was considered for a larger development, but that has been scaled back, and a two-family home on a property does not require site plan approval. And so therefore, we have pulled it back, and it's an area plan that is being proposed and shown to support the R2A zoning. Both lots meet with an administrative land division to clean up the lot line. Both lots will meet the dimensional standards for the R2A district. I would point out that the master plan actually recommends public land uses for this area of Platt Road. That site-specific land use recommendation predates all staff at City Hall. The conditions in the area have changed significantly since that recommendation was, and staff is recommending deviating from the plan. We did double-check with various departments, including our Parks Department, as well as University of Michigan. There is no public agency that would like this land. So we are, I am acknowledging that we are recommending deviating from the master plan. The density proposed, the density that is proposed with these two homes is less than than an ideal density. However, there is room for future development that would require a site plan, but this does not preclude any additional density in the future. And so staff is recommending approval of the rezoning and supports the area plan to demonstrate compatible development.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open up the public hearing. If there's anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this petition, you may step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and speak for up to 3 minutes. Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 3786 and 3802 Platt Road R2A two-family dwelling district zoning and area plan conditioned upon approval of an administrative land transfer. Do I have a commissioner that will move? Moved by Commissioner Sauvé, seconded by Commissioner Weatherby. We are in discussion. Commissioner Mills.
Thank you very much. I am normally super skeptical of area plans. I don't like them because you then can rezone and you don't always get what you see in the area plan. So I want to make sure I'm understanding this first. So if we were to rezone this tonight to R2A, what is allowed by right then would be to build to build 2 duplexes so long as that split is done appropriately. Is that the max that could be built without coming back before us?
Well, you can see in these graphics here, the pink lines are the parcel lines. And so the aqua toothpaste line outlines the site, and that pink line in the middle that's not directly down the center. So that it's quite offset. So the proposal is to do a land transfer to just straighten up that line.
Got it.
So that's partially addresses one. And then city code provides an exemption for when you build a single family or a duplex on a lot zoned for single family or two-family use. You do not need to site plan that. That can be done with building permits.
Right.
So the area plan here is showing that a two-family will be built on each one of those individual lots. Additional units can be built, whether they be in the form of a duplex or single families, but that would, none of those would be exempt from site planning. That would be another unit on a lot zone. So that would need to come in for a site plan for any additional units on either one of the lots as shown there. Give me 1 second here to double check the staff report. The combined lot area is around 70,000 square feet, and the R2A requires a minimum lot size of 8,500 square feet, and then when you have 8,500 square feet, you need 4,250 for each dwelling unit.
Got it.
So
we can increase the density by moving to an R2A.
R2A has more, just in terms of numbers, R2A has a higher maximum density than R1C.
Got it. And normally, I mean, some places we're worried about density, or some residents around are worried about density. I'm not necessarily here. I mean, this is on a bus line. I think that's great. And so I shouldn't have actually started by that. One of the other things that I want to make sure, when we've seen area plans before too, sometimes we talk about area plans because we worry about natural features. Even by right, like the fact that there's a floodplain here, like they're not going to be able to build in the floodplain by right. Is that true?
It's my, well.
What are the codes associated with that?
Well, again, we'd have to come back and site plan it.
Okay.
If there was to be a third unit or more on either one of the sites. I believe that residential use is allowed in the flood fringe part of the floodway if it is elevated above, if it's up on stilts, or, think coastal communities. If it's up on stilts, you can do that. You cannot have any residential in the floodway. So there's the floodplain line there. I see that. I'm not sure where the floodway line is, but that they're not currently proposing to develop in the floodplain at all right now. If they were to add a third unit, that site plan would come back, and with that site plan would then trigger all of our natural feature protections. It would also be reviewed by the floodplain coordinator for building permit impact, or building code, and so forth.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is, for additional, if they wanted to build more than 2 units on these combined pieces of property, it would need to come back before us, and that we have other things in place, even if they didn't want to build more than that, that would they're clearly going to have to meet setbacks no matter what.
Yes.
But if they wanted to build, they're not going to be able to build into that floodplain. Either way, like what this area plan means, just to make sure I'm clear, is we're not holding them to build exactly where they are or in that footprint of how, they could build very large duplexes or much smaller duplexes. We're not holding them to that.
Correct.
But there are some other regulations that are going to keep them in bounds, including not building in the floodplain, including the normal setback distances. I'm seeing lots of nodding heads. I just want to make sure that we understand what area plans do and don't. Like that box could move anywhere. That box could be a slightly different size. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Some communities actually don't require any for rezoning. Some communities allow a property to be rezoned, and it relies on the development regulation of your zoning ordinance to govern. Here in our ordinance, we don't do that. We say we can only rezone under a couple of circumstances. You either have to provide a site plan so we know exactly what you're proposing or what's going to be constructed, or you have to at least demonstrate via an area plan that what you're proposing is feasible and can be achieved under the zoning ordinance. So you're exactly right. In this circumstance, this plan, while I don't have any information to suggest that the plan is going to deviate substantially from this, to be just as you said, the rezoning of it ultimately by the city council would designate these R2A, and therefore it would be governed by the normal building code, which does look at things like floodplain restrictions to make sure that buildings aren't adversely impacting that and the buildings are safe. It would be required to meet setbacks. It would be required to meet all of the applicable building codes as it relates to, minimum size and the like. But you're absolutely right. It could deviate from this, but that doesn't mean it's just a free-for-all. It still has to meet a lot of standards.
Got it, yeah. And I should just start this by just saying, like, when I look at an area plan, I think, okay, that's fine, but like, what is worst case scenario? And for worst case scenario, sometimes it's being closer to neighbors than what neighbors might like, or it might be infringing on natural features. In this case, I'm really worried about infringing on natural features, but we have other things in our code, I think, that can take account for that. And so I am, especially if this, like, the idea of getting 2 duplexes here rather than 2 single-family homes, I think is great, like, providing more. Again, it's on a transit route, so I think that makes sense. It's just because I know I often am, like, totally negative Nancy about area plans. I wanted to make sure, like, be clear why I'm okay with this one.
And I don't, clearly we're supportive of this rezoning. We think it's a reasonable use of the land. We think it's an appropriate use of the land. We think that they've provided an area plan that shows that they can develop this responsibly and meet all those applicable requirements. But to that end, I just want to be clear, there are building code requirements, but we have a lot of natural resource requirements that are only applicable to site plan standards. For example, if you have a landmark tree on your single family lot, you can cut it down. When it's part of a site plan, we have more regulatory authority for that. So, it does cut both ways a little bit, but to be clear, we think that this is appropriate land use.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Moving down that vein, just with looking at some of the county information, it looks like there's definitely wetlands that run through this area. I know from my own experience working in this area that groundwater is really close to the surface and that soils are very difficult in terms of infiltration in this zone. Swift Run is nearby, but there's just a lot of clay layers. It's really impermeable. And just because it's zoned single family or, duplexes or whatever, if it's over 200 square feet of impervious surface that they're adding, they have to have stormwater control. So I'm just wondering what they have, and because they're not required, all of the infiltration testing that a normal site plan is, they can basically just undersize this thing and the water just sits there because the soils aren't going to take it. And so I'm wondering what the stormwater plan is, and is it in areas in the soils and the site that actually have a capacity to be able to actually deal with it. And so I just would like to have some understanding. This scale is difficult to see what's going on with that, but we do have a few coarse tools in our residential code to be able to deal with that. And so I'm just wondering what the plan is, and given that, we just know this area is tricky in terms of soils, is there any flexibility with that in terms of where those things are placed so that they can actually be effective? Can we be pitching things back towards the back of the site so it's getting, going towards the creek rather than going towards the road, things like that, to be able to still allow the duplexes, but just to maybe tweak it a little bit so that it's just more effective in terms of how it's arranged. Again, it's not a site plan, but there are some things we can do.
I think a lot of that would, I haven't got to that point yet. Those are the things that will show up on their grading permit and their building permit. I can follow up with our land development coordinator who reviews the grading permit and who enforces that component of the residential requirement for dealing with your stormwater. I've also taken some notes. I can flag that when these permits come through, these are some extra things to look for, but I don't think, the petitioner can confirm, I don't think they've gotten to that level of design detail yet. I'm assuming they'd want the rezoning first to know whether they can even then actually design their duplexes. But I would have to rely on our land development coordinator when reviewing those permits.
So just my 2 cents on some of this is that I would be very wary of allowing a French drain kind of storage situation for this, which is allowed under your code, but the soils are such that it's going to fill up once and then never infiltrate after that. And so I would really lean towards doing some sort of vegetated system here to be able to deal with stormwater, because that's really your only hope in these kind of soils. So I know that that's allowable in the code, but I don't think functionally it's actually going to do what we want it to do in terms of the code. So that if you are in this early stage of how you're designing things, that here's your opportunity to be able to think about how that would work, and that hopefully the land development coordinator would be able to direct you all and how to think about that so that it's an effective solution. Because if you're at the early stages, it's time to do it, right? It's not fully engineered, and it looks like the site is kind of crowned, but that you flow in both directions. And if you can kind of encourage things to go back towards the back and handle some of your stormwater back there in a shallow vegetated way and just have it blend in with whatever the woods are doing there, I think that's going to be your best bet. And I just, again, I really think just having the hole with the pea stone in it that a lot of people do is going to do zero here. So if you could kind of guide things in that direction, since we don't get to review what this thing looks like and how it's going to be dealt with later in the process, that if we could at least put some red flags in a few things so that people further down the line in terms of the city permitting process can guide things, that would be great.
Further comment? Seeing no, right, ready for a vote? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? It's approved. Thank you. Moving on to item 9C in our agenda, 2251 West Liberty Street, special exemption use and site plan for Planning Commission approval. We'll start with the petitioner's report. You'll have 10 minutes to address the Planning Commission. We'll then move on to staff report and then public comment.
All right, great. My name is Daryl Mines. I'm one of the owner-operators of 2251. I would always like to start out by saying thank you to staff and everything. It's been a pleasure working with you. And it's always humbling to come after these huge projects when it's just a grassroots type of thing that we're doing here. Our site is existing. We are not proposing any new improvements to the site. There have been several site improvements done at a prior SEU. Next door, we put in all new driving. We put in a great new bike rack per recommendation of the city. We are also going to move forward and put in a fire hydrant to meet the SEU requirements for this facility. A few things about the company. We have been operating here since 2015. We've had 0 incidences, and we've been great neighbors and have come to kind of be appreciated by our little community that we have around there at the corner of Stadium and Liberty. And with that, again, we've had no incidents, whether it be with any, theft or anything like that. I know people think, unfortunately, medical marijuana gets a bad rap for that. We've had none, absolutely none. So I guess with that, I can see if there's any questions, or I think Jeff has some slides that he can show.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to staff report. Mr. Cowan.
Thank you. The petitioner seeks to, The petitioner seeks to obtain special exception use approval to operate a marijuana-infused product processing center in an existing building, zone C2B. It's part of a small commercial center. The C2B zoning district allows commercial office and residential uses. The petitioner currently uses the site to produce medical marijuana food products. The business is called Detroit Fudge Company. Staff recommends that the special exception use be approved with conditions subject to Planning Commission consideration, because the proposed special exception use is of such location, size, and character as to be compatible with the zoning district in which the site is situated. And the location and size of the proposed use, its nature and intensity, the site layout and access, and effect of the proposed use on public services would not be hazardous or inconvenient to the neighborhood, nor unduly conflict with the normal traffic of the neighborhood. I do have a few slides I'd like to show. This is the zoning map. It shows the C2B zoning district, part of a longer commercial center. This is at the very tail end of it, the southern side of it. This is an aerial photograph, and this is a photo that gets a little closer to this particular portion of the site, showing the existing structure with some surface parking. 1,000-foot radius map. This is the site plan that shows a site plan virtually identical to the one that you saw for 2247 West Liberty. The main change here is the petitioner is now showing a new fire hydrant being installed to meet the fire department hose lay requirements, which are required because of the distance this particular building happens to be from an existing fire hydrant out in West Liberty. Floor plan shows a pretty modest building and some photos. We do have a painted pedestrian area that does have a pedestrian, or does have pedestrian signs added. This is a photo of the building itself where the food processing takes place. And this image shows the brand new solid waste and recycling center, which is currently screened on a concrete pad, the far southern side of the site. And that's it for the photos. That's the end of the staff report.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing. If anyone's in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this petition, you may step forward and address the Planning Commission. Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing, and I will encourage one of my fellow commissioners to read the motion. To read it and also move it. Commissioner Mills.
The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission, after hearing all interested persons and reviewing all relevant information, including an accompanying site plan, finds the petitions to substantially meet the standards in Chapter 55 zoning ordinance, Section 5:105 special exceptions, and Section 5:50.1 regulations concerning medical use of marijuana, and therefore approves the 2251 West Liberty Street special exception use for a marijuana-infused product processing center. This approval is based on the following findings. 1, the proposed use will be consistent with the C2B business service district, which allows for commercial, office, and residential uses. 2, the proposed use will not adversely impact traffic, pedestrians, bicyclist circulation, or road intersections based on the location. West Liberty Street provides access to the site, and the proposed use is consistent with other surrounding uses. 3, through documentation submitted by the petitioner regarding waste disposal, inventory tracking, security, and other methods of operation of the facility, the processing center will be operated in a manner that will not have an adverse impact on the neighboring properties or area and will not have a detrimental impact on natural features. This special exception use approval is based on the following conditions. 1, the petitioner obtaining and maintaining both a state of Michigan medical marijuana license and a City of Ann Arbor medical marijuana permit, and providing documentation to planning services within 3 years of the City Planning Commission approval date of this petition. 2, the petitioner operating a medical marijuana business at this address within 3 years of the City Planning Commission approval date of this petition. 3, the special exception use may only occupy the current 2,493 square feet of 2251 West Liberty Street. 4, approval of the special exception use is subject to the petitioner maintaining site improvements as shown on the site plan, including new bicycle parking, bumper blocks, an access easement, delineated pedestrian pathways, new barrier-free parking spaces, new striping of existing parking spaces, and a relocated dumpster. 5, approval of the special exception use is also subject to the petitioner constructing a new fire hydrant as shown on the site plan to the satisfaction of the Public Services Area Administrator. 6, hours of operation will be limited to Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., closed Saturday and Sunday. And that the Ann Arbor Planning Commission approves the attached site plan which demonstrates compliance with the applicable special exception use standards as no physical development of the property is proposed. That's what I move.
We are in discussion. Commissioner Weatherby.
Well, 2 things. One, got to say, slightly disappointed that it's not actually a fudge shop, but, you know. And the second one is just, it makes it so much easier to feel confident that you will do a good job when you did all the things that we asked you to do on the previous one. And so, so I just wanted to thank you that those, you did those and they look like they're well done, and so thank you for that, and I don't see any problem with this one.
We do make fudge.
I do have a question, and this isn't actually in regard to this, but, one of our requirements is that you receive your license from the state of Michigan. For your other projects, have you already received your license, or are you still in the
We're
queue
due
there?
to go in front of the board, hopefully in this December meeting that is coming up, yes. We've been waiting for the C of O. We just got that last week. So that was one of the last requirements from the state to actually go through the licensure process. So we are, continuing forward on that path, yes.
Okay, thank
Most
you.
definitely. Thanks.
Any other discussion? Yeah, Commissioner Gibrandal.
So in terms of the requirements for this, is it only, they can only make stuff here, right? They can't sell stuff out of here? Is that?
Yeah, based on the medical marijuana laws as established currently, this is a infused product processor. You recall we actually created this definition.
Right.
It's sort of unique in the context of the state. The state's lumps this and a lot of other uses together as processors. Ultimately, the city council followed your advice and recognized that uses like this are really, they're more akin to like a bakery or a confectionery or something. I'm terrible with words tonight, generally.
You're doing good.
And
Disagree.
but that said, they still have to follow the requirements of the Medical Marijuana Facilities Act, which means that only provisioning centers can be used for sales. Transportation has to be conducted through secure transporters, and like all uses, that's part of the state's required and probably at this point somewhat aspirational seed to sale tracking of every product. So I don't know if there's anything that I miscategorized by that, but so in short, no retail sales will occur at this facility. They are producing products that they will then, through that network, distribute to other provisioning centers. Provisioning centers is where those products can ultimately be purchased by a cardholder.
Okay. One of the things that I find slightly troubling about all of this is that you can call something like the Fudge Company, and that like a 5-year-old kid is going to think, let's go get fudge there, and it's, not for the 5-year-old. But if it's completely confined and there's no, in the M1 where you can have 10%, blah, 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 doing retail, I just want it to be super, super clear, because that's just one of the, the fact that these things are made in gummy bears, and it's an issue, and until we have regulations at the federal level, it's not going to change. And so it's like, I just want to make sure we're doing what we can at our scale to be able to make sure that this goes into the hands of the right people and not little people. So as long as we're completely ironclad on that, then I have no problem with your name. But if if there was any chance, then it just feels like that's really a confusing line for people, so.
Just to bring some light to that, the state has very, very strict guidelines on packaging and verbiage that are on the packages. We've had to revamp a lot of things to fit that standard. We can't even make a gummy bear. It's not, they won't allow it, because it does appeal to minors, and that's something that they took very seriously. The verbiage on the package is extensive to help mitigate that, because we are concerned about that as well. At Detroit Fudge, sorry for the confusing name, we kind of prided ourselves in that fact on being leaders in the industry. We have been open since 2015 and have led the industry in those types of things with the child-proof packaging and the verbiage that's on the package itself. And our packages in no way appeal to a minor. We have red boxes that are like just red, or they're black, or what it is. It's not a vibrant color that a purple that a kid's going to want to, more glean to. So because child safety is paramount. I have 2 young kids at home right now that are, my life, and that importance is always reflected through us, through our company. So if there are ever any questions, I can give you my email to whoever. I know Brett has it, Jeff has it. I'd be more than willing to share more of those kind of inner workings so that, Planning Commission and just staff in general can understand our industry better. The other thing that we've done from day one is tested every single product that has left our building. If it does not meet our exact standards, it doesn't leave, period. And that's happened from day one, and that's why our brand is where it is today, because of that. People trust our product. They know they get what they get every single time. So, but I'm more than willing to share any information with any
It's just
staff.
helpful for me to hear what our state is doing, because I know in other states it's different. And so that's why it's helpful for us to be able to differentiate, because we're all being asked to basically do this on our own, because there is no action at the federal level right now, anyway. I've just seen it work out very differently in other states.
It is.
So I didn't know what all those standards were, so thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, and I'll completely throw Colorado under the bus. They are terrible.
Right. Yeah, I know.
They
I've
don't have
seen-
testing requirements and so forth, and that is another thing that I actually have enjoyed working with, especially Brett, when we did do the text amendment. That's actually another layer that we have to abide by. It's a stricter thing, because we can only do certain things at our facility, not as broad as a regular processor. So I commend Ann Arbor for being one of the leading cities in the Midwest, for not only this, but a lot of things that you do here. I've sat through so many meetings now at this point, and you guys are talking about the LEED stuff and like the roofs and whatever. That's amazing. I don't understand it, but I can help you where I can. So thank you again.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard?
Yeah, I would just add in this particular circumstance, I think is a great question. The physical location of this particular facility, though,
Yeah.
is about as protective, I think,
Right.
of sort of that general traffic as any might be. But maybe that's something we want to consider for such facilities in the future, because some of them might be in a more, more accessible amongst other businesses. And if we consider other such special exception use permits for the use, you have the ability to think about signage if you want to sort of de-emphasize
Right.
signage to attract that. I mean, I'm sure they need some just for
Sure.
conducting business, but it doesn't have to be the same kind of signage that a provisioning center might be, where you're really trying to attract that retail trade.
Right,
So.
right. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Woods?
Just a couple of questions under some of the special exception use standards, and I was looking at number 4, and I think as as staff was making the presentation, and you showed us the pictures, you showed us the striping of the parking lot and those kinds of things. Could you just show us the other things, or are these things which are still to be put into place? I know you also mentioned a relocated dumpster.
I'd be happy to speak to that. In order for the petitioner to receive their zoning compliance certificate from the city, they needed to demonstrate that they completed all the improvements that they showed on the site plan for 2247. The petitioner did include all those improvements. So we did inspect the site. Those improvements included the new bicycle parking, the bumper blocks. They did provide an access easement. They did delineate the pedestrian pathways. They did provide new barrier-free parking spaces. And they did relocate the dumpster on a new dumpster pad with a dumpster screen. So we were able to verify all of that. Since this property is almost next door in the same complex and owned by the same individuals, they didn't have as much to do because they had already done it.
Okay. So can you just, I'm just trying to, so one, the address is 2251, that's the current one that we're looking at
Correct.
now. And then you've already approved 2247, that's on West Stadium, or is that West Stadium or is that West?
It's West Liberty.
Okay. So can you just show me on your
Yep.
aerial map where they're located? I'm just trying to see,
So can you see my cursor?
yes.
So this is the portion of the property that is 2251,
Okay,
where Detroit Fudge is, and they're in this building here.
okay.
And in this building next door 2247 is located.
Okay.
And so basically next door, so it's in the same complex.
Okay, and so like Hello Foz would be closer up to the street?
Right, yeah, correct. They're up along West Liberty here.
Okay, all right, okay.
Right about there.
Got it, thank you.
Commissioner Ackerman.
I have a small question, and perhaps more out of curiosity than the scope of this conversation. So of the 5 types of allowed facilities under state law, you now have 2 across property lines. Will you need secure transport to carry from one of your properties next door to the other?
I really hope not.
Okay.
Is
that up to the state to enforce?
It is.
Okay.
That is completely up to the state as to how we would have to literally walk stuff next door. And to that point, though, of walking in next door and talking about the C2B zoning, because we were the ones that petitioned for the text amendment, a processor does not need a sign. I've said enough on that. We don't have one. We haven't had one. There is no reason. You're a wholesale entity. So if the city is looking for something to curb that, is don't let them have a sign. I mean, she's probably gonna get mad at me because she wants one, but just that little shingle to hang. But they're not needed. And the way the state system works with their metric and the way it's integrated, I just don't see a need. So if that's my 2 cents on that. Right, because again, as Commissioner Ackerman had alluded, the secure transport comes and gets it. It's not the provisioning center, which is the retail end, coming to get it. We are not delivering it. So the entity that is picking it up and delivering it knows exactly where they're going. If someone tries to fake that to you guys, I would smell something afoul.
Commissioner Mills.
I'll stay here.
I'm going to go back to the kind of what Commissioner Woods was talking about in terms of working through what's required in order to, as one of the conditions. And so it sounds to me, to staff, like 4 is just copied from what we had before. And it's those same things, and they already did it, and that's great. The thing that's new is 5, right? It is the fire hydrant.
Yes.
And so I think that I completely agree with Commissioner Weatherby. Like the idea that you have already done these improvements and like showed good faith is fantastic. That's an expensive one before you actually get your thing from the state, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's some unknown there. Yeah. And we do ask petitioners to make these these things in order to get their C of O. So I'm guessing that this is something that we bond for, like that they put a guarantee, like how does that work?
Yeah, and in some circumstances, we frankly would require it before we would entertain any certificate of occupancy. We have, in some of the other provisioning centers, we have recognized sort of the unique circumstance of what's happening with the state imposing deadlines to potentially shut down centers and processing facilities if they haven't achieved certain milestones. So we have had some conversations with them about the ability to resolve that before a certificate of occupancy is issued. But I can tell you we are also entertaining the possibility of issuing a temporary certificate of occupancy with some sort of performance bond that they would have to achieve that. In this particular case, they are going to have to go through some pretty robust, as you indicated, design requirements, finalizing that. That will actually have to not only be approved by the city, but by the state. And so we recognize sort of the convergence of that. So if there's an opportunity for us to work with them to secure that, we will likely consider that. This circumstance also, I think, lends itself to that because they've been operating at that facility for some time. This improvement is actually sort of an opportunity of the special exception use permit process, frankly. They've had a history of operating successfully. We will, of course, as it's so related to fire safety, will be consulting with the fire department before any decisions made in that regard.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to see that, because I understand there's lots of moving pieces and risk associated with both sides, right? Like we don't want to just issue the C of O. CFO.
C of O.
C
Certificate
of
of
O.
Occupancy.
C of O, thank you. Certificate of occupancy, I'll just say that. And then not have the conditions fulfilled, right?
Sure.
But also, that's a pretty big ticket item, so.
It is, and to be honest, we haven't got the full ramifications of what it's going to cost, but after a $20,000 dumpster, not too bad.
All right.
So, again, I understand.
It's going to be more.
I know it is. And after seeing these other projects and stuff, again, it is something that, we're this far, so why would there's no reason for us to stop. And it's something that we view as it's an improvement to our site. We do own the site, so it's okay for us. I mean, if our building were happen to be burning, I would be glad it's there.
Yeah.
So it's all things considered. It is a great improvement for not only our site but the city as well. I know I was looking up the city stuff, and you guys are ISO 3, I believe it is, for your fire code, for your fire recognition. That's pretty good. It's actually really great. So we'll continue to contribute to that, and you guys do not in any way put as many hoops to jump through as the state does. So thanks for that as well.
I haven't sprung this on the petitioner yet, but
Surprise.
we have some provisions within the code for rearrangement of parking areas, and one of the things as they start submitting their designs for the water main, it likely will have some impact to the parking area and some required restoration. So one of the things I was going to reach out to them, nothing to commit to now, or I don't know if it's possible, but we might explore to see if there's any possibilities to improve the pedestrian access to that through that work. So if there is going to be some sort of substantial work to the parking area to accommodate the fire hydrant, certainly nothing that would elevate to requiring to come back to Planning Commission, but we might explore with them. It might even be a potential for cost savings if there was some way to achieve that hydrant with maybe a pedestrian treatment versus repaving the parking area. So that's something that I'm happy to sit down and discuss with you to see if there's any creative ways that we could maybe improve both those circumstances.
Great.
Commissioner Sauvé.
So this might be residual, but there's, on the site plan, proposed exterior emergency stair. Is that still part of the plan and requirement?
So that's part of the actual state Bureau of Fire Services.
Okay.
That has not been constructed. It does not have any impact on site flow whatsoever because it is at the south side of the building. We will obviously be getting permitted work to get that done once.
Is that just going to touch down on grade, or are you putting a pad there to connect to the parking lot or anything? Or are we
it's
just
going to touch down on grade because it's coming from the second floor and coming down.
But like, are you pouring a concrete pad for those
No.
stairs to land to, or it's just landing onto the grass itself? Okay.
Yeah, I know all about the impervious surfaces, how important it is.
That's what I was just trying to kind of figure out the scope of it, because it's just kind of labeled out there. I'm like, where are we going with that one? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Briggs.
This is very random, but since signage did come up, just a heads up, I don't think we could create a different category of signage for different, medical marijuana facilities per Reed, Reed versus the town of Gilbert. I don't think, that's kind of content neutrality. So just a heads up that I don't think that's something we could consider moving forward. I'm not trying to start a discussion around that, just mentioning it.
Want to move on.
Thank you. Commissioner Woods.
We always talk about hours of operation whenever any special exception things come before us. And so in this case, it looks like your plan is to be open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., so about 16 hours. Is that like running 2 shifts or something?
Yeah, we are already at the demand that we are starting a second shift. So when we were proposing our hours, that is the reason for that, is that we do have a 7 to 4 shift and then overlap from 3 to 11. Okay.
And then closed on Saturdays and Sundays. So if it turns out that your operation needs more than that, Mr. Leonard, would he be coming back to us for that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That was the question.
Further discussion? All right, let's vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? It is approved. Thank you. Moving on to audience participation. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission? If so, please step up to the podium. Seeing no one, we'll move on to commission proposed business. Are there any commissioners who'd like to propose business? Commissioner Woods.
I'm not really sure that I'm proposing something in this case, but I know we talked earlier about the Transportation Committee and what we're going to be looking at. And you might remember about a month ago, the issue of the birds which have come to our city was brought up, and they have really multiplied, particularly over in the campus area. And I just was wondering whether or not there's been any sort of information or update that you can give us, because they are, unfortunately, they're just sometimes being left on a sidewalk or in the way, and people, somebody was telling me, well, somebody is on, in a wheelchair, they can't get past them, and, you know, a couple times I picked one up and moved it up out of the way. So I was just wondering what our thoughts are on that, or any updates.
Transportation Commissioner Rep probably has more, but I can provide an update. I know that city administration has been working with the company to try to find the balance. I know that on the short term, the emphasis was making sure that pedestrian right-of-ways were not being blocked, and probably sparking a discussion, a more comprehensive discussion about how to address them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm happy to share something with the Planning Commission as to kind of what that role is, and then I don't know if there's anything else from the Transportation Commission lens.
Commissioner Trudeau.
I can probably more immediately give you a definitive. City Council will actually be voting on an interim agreement with Bird tomorrow night.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so it's consent agenda item 14, and if I could send it to Brett, the resolution, if you could forward it along for everyone's reference.
Okay, that'd be great. Just a question. So are those machines to be run on, is it okay to have them on sidewalks, or should they only be in the street?
I think that's a gray area for the time being.
Okay.
But no, I believe as a motorized vehicle, it's intended that they be on the street. How we enforce that is more difficult.
Okay. Thank you.
There are some ambiguities between state law and local regulation, and I think we're all working it out. The Transportation Commission has established a subcommittee to provide advice to the city on not just Bird, but all sort of micromobility operators and some of these newer kinds of vehicles that are showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be on that subcommittee. We haven't had our first meeting yet. I don't remember. It's soon. So yeah, we will be starting to have those conversations along with the city, moving forward with Bird and some of these other operators directly. There is, just to be clear, there is a policy, the city policy as I understand it is any scooter blocking the right of way, so if it's in the sidewalk or in the street or otherwise inappropriately parked, it's the city's policy to impound them, and they have been impounding scooters that they find in the wrong place. And how that gets managed between the companies, I think, is one of the points of negotiation. And I believe there was discussion, I don't know if this is firmed up yet, of creating a cap on the total number of vehicles that can be deployed in the city as we're ramping up as one of the points of regulation. There's more to it, but those were to address some of your questions where things are going.
Thank you.
And we're also actively having conversations with the university. I know the staff has been talking to folks at the university who have their own set of concerns about these. So.
Commissioner Gubrandel.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So is there a way that citizens can, like, who do we call if we see them blocking the sidewalk? Do we call the police? Like, is it an A2 fix-it kind of thing? Like what, because I see this all the time, and I'd love to just start getting on this so that they start straightening up and start communicating with their users that this just can't be. You have to park it in a place that is safe for people. So is there anything, do we know anything about how an ordinary citizen can speed up the process and not just have to have a cop car drive by at the right time?
I would say to fix it would actually be pretty effective, or you could just probably call community standards. I'm guessing those would be the two principal, but A2Fix-It you could probably access from your phone or email. And if, I guess the downside of that is that they could move by then.
Right, no,
So-
I know, right.
I think at least if, if it's similar to cars, A2 Fix-It, they just say call the non-emergency police number, because anything that can be moved quickly, and those move extraordinarily quickly. So I think A2 Fix-It, they're just going to say, contact the non-emergency police number.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other commission proposed business? Do you have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Trudeau. We are adjourned. Thank you.